Okay, great. So you all will note that this meeting is being recorded, and if you would prefer not to take part in the recorded meeting, please just hang up. Okay, so what is this webinar about? As we said, we're in the process of developing an online tutorial which will focus on understanding the GPR for AmeriCorps state, national, and tribal programs. Tribal grantees who applied directly to CNCS under the tribal NOFO are considered national grantees in this tutorial. Let's look at what we're going to cover, Liz. Slide, we're going to cover how to access, fill in, and submit this slide. In this tutorial, we're going to cover how to access, fill in, and submit the mid-year and end-of-year Grantee Progress Report for your program. Cover how and when each GPR is due and what information needs to be in it, and how to review and respond to feedback from your CNCS program officer so you can finalize your GPR. For the actual online tutorial, we've created a scenario and basically observe a State Commission program officer as she enters information for the Commission's competitive portfolio, noticing the difference along the way for the formula GPR. We also notice the difference for the national programs as well as annual versus mid-year GPR processes. We're going to follow the same rhythm, if you will, in this presentation, even though it's not interactive. A note again, the GPR information for national programs is the information that applies to the tribal programs. Also a note about for this 2014 grant year. If you as a commission have subgrantees with both old and new performance measures on your prime, you will have 4 reports. You'll have an old mid-year, a new mid-year, an old end-of-year, and a new end-of-year. Any state subgrantee or national grantee that applied as a new or recompete in 2013 used new screens. Any subs or national grantees that were continuations in 2013 used old screens. The old mid-year and old end-of-year will look exactly like the old GPRs that you have completed in previous years. This tutorial covers the new mid-year and the new end-of-year. We'll use the terms mid-year to refer to the semi-annual GPR and the term and annual to refer to the annual GPR throughout this presentation. E-Grant system refers to the mid-year as Progress Report Light or semi-annual and the end-of-year as annual. Okay, that sort of sets us up for what we're going to cover and some things to keep in mind as we go through. Let's now look at, as we set the stage, how is this information? I know that many of you, and we all know that most of you use this information to report to your own stakeholders, beneficiaries, and grantees and subs. The information that you report in is also very important to CNCS. They need accurate and correct data because they use this in reporting to Congress and other stakeholders. They roll up the data across all the programs in order to represent the impact of these federal dollars. In addition, program staff at CNCS use this information to monitor grantee progress and identify trends and issues that may lead to changes in policies and procedures. Also, the information informs the allocation of training and technical assistance resources or opportunities for peer-to-peer learning. CNCS's Office of Public Affairs may use the information to promote service. Therefore, completing the GPR accurately and in a timely manner is essential. With that all said, let's get started in how you access your progress reports. Liz?
Thank you, Justine. Okay, so to get to the GPRs, you'll need to log on to the eGrant system. From the home page of the eGrant system, you'll click Progress Report located on the lower right corner of the screen. And then you'll see a list of possible progress reports for your existing grants. Find the grant number for the current program year, and this is our sample grant number here. And click on the orange arrow key to the right of the grant number to expand the list. Previously, the due date for the annual GPR was October 31st. Starting this year in 2014, the due date for the annual report is November 30th. And so you can see here the annual reports have a due date of November 30th, 2014. The mid-year is due April 30th, 2014. Commissions will complete one progress report for each of their prime. So if you have a competitive cost, reimbursement, competitive fixed amount, competitive EPA, formula cost reimbursement, or formula fixed EPA, you'll complete a set of progress reports for each of your prime. As Justine was mentioning, for the 2014 year, commissions may need to complete 4 progress reports, depending on if their subgrantees have used old and new performance measures. So here are the 4 reports that we're going to be focusing on. So how do you tell which one is old and which one is new? Let's take a look at the screen here. The new report is listed on top and is labeled Progress Report Annual as the report type or PR type. In the second row, we have the old report, and that's labeled as full for the PR type. Both of these reports are in Progress Report Initial Entry, and we'll have the edit link next to them. Below these annual reports, we see the mid-year reports with the due date again of April 30th. We submitted these early reviewed, so both mid-year reports are in reviewed status. Again, the new mid-year is called Progress Report Light or Semi-Annual, and the old one is called Full in the PR type column. Today, we're going to be working on the annual screen, so we'll click on the edit link next to it. Once we do that, we'll be in the GPR screen. And the first screen we'll see is the General Information section or tab. Before we talk about the GPR screens, let's orient ourselves a little by going over the navigations that are specific to eGrants, which should be pretty familiar to you all. On the upper right corner, notice the 5 blue navigational buttons that appear on every screen while you're in eGrants. The home button will take you back to the eGrants homepage where we clicked on the Progress Report link. The Back to eGrants button allows us to go back to the list of GPRs for your program. The My Account will allow you to update your organization's contact information as well as your account profile. Clicking the Help button will open a pop-up window that contains additional details about the screen. And of course, finally, after you're done adding the information, just simply click Log Out to log out of the system. Below these navigational buttons, you'll see some information which are populated from elsewhere in the system. Make sure that the grant number is correct. Along with the grant number, you'll see the application ID number and the sponsor or grantee name. Okay, so let's move on and talk about the navigations that are specific to the GPR screens. This is just a more magnified view of the previous screen. The GPR consists of 7 sections accessed via tabs. As I mentioned, we are looking at the general information page. Also contains the demographics information, MSY's members tab, performance indicators, performance measures, narratives, and summary. Note that for the mid-year GPR, you don't need to complete the sections on demographics, MSYs, members, performance indicators, and narratives. So for the mid-year, you are essentially only completing the section on performance measures. This information is included in the mid-year GPR instructions, so please refer to it for guidance. We'll review each of these sections in depth and provide information and examples to demonstrate how to complete each section. Before doing so, however, we'll take a look at the main frame of this section. Notice the pre-populated information. The grant number is listed here again. Check the reporting period start and end dates to make sure that you have the correct report. If it's incorrect, you can use the Cancel button to go back to the list of GPRs to select the correct report. We'll use the Begin button to start entering information. But once we've added some information, that button will change to Continue Working, which will allow you to resume your work. At the bottom of the screen is a summary table. This section will display all past reports associated with this grant. We can view or print a PDF version of these reports by clicking on this link. Please note that open amendments interfere with the accuracy of the progress report. Therefore, if you have an open amendment on your grant, you'll see a warning message and will not be able to update any information. If you do see this error message, you should talk with your program officer to ensure resolution of the amendment so that you can submit your GPR on time. Okay. Justine, can we pause here for some questions that came in via chat before we move on?
Yes, this is a perfect time to do that.
Okay, great. First question is, hi, will the new only be rolling out once you are a new/recompete, or will everyone be using the new one next year?
Everyone will use the new module next year.
Thank you, Carla. Next question. Previously, we were required to enter narratives only in the formula grant. We included narratives for all grants in the screen. Is that still the case, or will each individual GPR now need narrative info, including both the old and new reports?
So that question will be answered in more detail as we go through the presentation. There are very specific instructions about what gets entered in each GPR and what's in just one GPR. Still, the narratives and the demographics are only entered in one place typically, but some of the other explanations about performance measures and such are entered in the individual GPR. So you'll see that as we go through.
Okay, thanks, Carla. And then we noticed some incorrect information in the pre-populated information in the MSY/members on our formula grant. How would we get that corrected?
So if the information is pre-populated, that means it's being pulled from somewhere. So the first thing to do would be just to go back to whatever applicant that you're looking at and open up their application and just confirm what they actually had entered in their application. Often we see mistakes in the GPR that actually trace back to the applicant having entered something incorrectly in the application. So if that's the case, you would work with your program officer to do an amendment to correct the application so that the information pulls correctly. Given that this is a brand new system, it's also possible that there could be a glitch of some kind. So after you have gone through the step of checking the application, if it still seems incorrect to you, then you should contact the help desk.
Thanks, Carla. And this person did clarify that in this case, a grantee is listed twice.
Okay. The help desk about that, unless that grantee has two separate applications.
Okay. Thanks, Carla. Justine, back to you.
Okay, good. We're going to move on now and have a look at the Demographics tab and the Demographics section. This section contains a list of indicators of interest to CNCS and in line with the strategic plan. You're required to report the numbers of 1, individuals who applied to be AmeriCorps members, and 2, volunteers recruited and or managed by your programs. In addition, if you collect data on them, you're required to include the information on any of the other indicators, and any of the other indicators 1 through 9. You can see that all on your screen for all programs. The indicators that you see here beginning with indicator 10 have been added for school turnaround grantees. You'll enter all demographic information for school turnaround grantees and subs on the school turnaround prime GPR. We'll get more into this with the next couple of slides. Commissions will complete the demographics section of in the formula cost reimbursement GPR only. A note here for this year's submission, and this is addressing the question that came up. If you're submitting a GPR on the new screens, you will report your entire portfolio demographics on the formula cost reimbursement GPR there on the new screens. Even if you have some old screens, your whole portfolio will be recorded here on this new screen. If, as a state commission, you had only continuations in 2013 and are only using the old GPR screens, you will submit your demographic information in the formula cost reimbursement GPR in the old screens. And again, school turnaround grantees will have a school turnaround prime, and the demographics for those grantees covering all of the indicators will be submitted on that prime. National Direct grantees aggregate and report this information for all operating sites and service locations. Okay, there's the overview. Now, as I said, for the online tutorial, we've developed a scenario for a state commission, and we just wanted to introduce this to you here. You don't have to remember any of this, but as we come back to it, you'll have a sense of where we got it. So this state commission has 3 formula grantees. One is Vets to Vets and Veterans and Military Families, High Achievers in Education, and Ready, Set, Go in Disaster Services. They also have 3 grantees in their competitive grant portfolio. Next screen, please, Liz. A Garden to School Healthy Futures program, a Promising Start Education program, and a Green Corps Environmental Stewardship program. Again, the only reason we wanted to show you this is so that you can understand where we've come up with some of the data. Let's now look then at the demographics again. Based on the scenario that we just talked about, this state commission had a total of 250 applicants to their AmeriCorps programs. So you can see we've entered 250 in the field under value. Moving on, the number of volunteers the program actually recruited was 1,500. 15 AmeriCorps members participated in disaster service projects through the Ready, Set, Go project that educates citizens about fire safety and preparedness. Therefore, we're entering 15 in the number of AmeriCorps members who participated in disaster service projects. Since Ready, Set, Go worked on preparedness only and didn't focus on response or recovery, you would enter zeros in the columns to which responds to response or recovery. Veterans Serving Vets has 20 AmeriCorps members who are vets. These members are supporting 90 veterans who recently returned home. So we've entered 20 for the number of veterans serving as AmeriCorps members and 90 for the numbers of veterans served. None of the programs served veteran or military families, so we've entered zeros in the next fields. Garden to School is serving 8 schools to educate students on healthy living and exposing them to local fruits and gardening. And High Achievers serve 4 local high schools to help students improve attendance rates. But the following 9 indicators are specifically for school turnaround and do not apply to those programs. So we've added zeros in each of those fields. A note, you must enter something in every field, either a number or a 0. Do we have questions about the demographics section?
No questions from chat, thanks.
Okay, great. Let's move on to MSYs and members. This information, just like the demographics, is not included in the mid-year and is required in the end of year. It is in this tab that the information about the number of member service years and members allocated to each focus area and strategic plan objective is entered. Remember, from the application process, MSYs represent the overall proportion of program resources allocated to an objective. Member counts are the number of members engaged in activities related to a strategic plan objective. Because a member may be performing service under more than one strategic plan objective, members may be double counted across objectives. So the total number of members in the chart is not expected to equal the number of members serving in the project. In the MSY actual column, you will enter the actual, I'm sorry, let me go back a minute. We're not to actuals yet. Let's talk about targets. I jumped ahead too far. During the application process, and Carla was just referring to this, during the application process, the state subgrantees and national programs provided the number of MSYs that would be allocated to each strategic plan objective, as well as the number of members whose activities would address each of those objectives, are populated in the MSY target and member target columns of the chart. So that's what you're seeing as you pull this up. Those are the targets that come from the application. When you get into the GPR, what you add are the actual number of MSYs allocated to each of the subgrantees objectives. And in the member actual column, you enter the actual number of members engaged in activities related to each objective. As usual, round up all decimals to the next highest number, to the nearest whole number, not highest. Okay, let's just look for a minute at the more closely at the numbers. So that you can see how this looks. In our sample program, the subgrantee reported that the MSY target for the objective school readiness was 19. And for the objective other, the MSY target was 6. In the actuals, they did have 19 MSYs allocated to the school readiness objective. However, they had one member that had been allocated to the other objective drop out due to personal reasons. So the actual number of MSYs there was 5. In recording the members engaged in activities related to these objectives, they had anticipated that 25 MSYs would be engaged in activities related to both of these objectives. They did have 24 engaged in activities related to both. Talk about this when we look at the national screen, but just a note, when you're submitting your GPR, when you're preparing your GPR, you add the numbers, and the system is actually the one that automatically figures out the difference in the percent difference. So Liz, let's have you talk about this screen from the national program perspective.
Okay, thanks, Justine. All right, so let's take a look at the screen from the national programs perspective. If you are a national program, you will fill in the actual numbers for each objective. The targets for MSYs and members have already been filled in. This information is from your application and represents what you anticipated against the CNCS focus area and strategic plan objectives. So in our sample program, Youth America, we anticipated allocating the resources as indicated on the screen. For the objective Finding Opportunity, we anticipated 300 MSYs, but actually have 285. So that's about 5% less than anticipated. For the objective Housing, we anticipated 600 MSYs, but only had 595. So again, that's a difference of about 5 less. And for the objective Other Economic Opportunity, our target was 150, but the actual number is 130. And that's a difference of 20 less than our target. Member actuals, should be this column actually. These numbers tend to be higher. Again, remember from the GPR instructions that we are counting the number of members who performed an activity that was part of an objective. For example, if a member performs activities in both objectives, finding opportunity and housing, then that member is counted twice. So the members can be double counted because they have performed activities under multiple objectives. And the numbers in the the member columns reflect that. Once you're done filling in the numbers, check mark Done with Section. After that, click Calculate MSY's members, and we'll calculate and fill in the numbers on screen for the difference and the percent difference. Okay, and please remember to round up to the nearest whole. And Justine will now talk about how to provide an explanation for this section. Justine?
Great. Thanks, Liz. If you wish to provide an explanation about the data that you've entered on this tab, you can do so by clicking Grantee Narrative to expand a text box for this purpose. If the MSY and member allocations were not closely aligned with actuals, then you would need to describe the reasons, including any program design changes for these differences. No other explanation is required. In our scenario that you've just seen, the State Commission portfolio had a 2% difference in terms of target and actual in both MSYs and in members. So the State Program Officer decided that they were actually pretty closely aligned. In the national program, however, we see a couple of areas where there was between a 5% and a 13% difference in one objective. Those could be explained here. You could explain that discrepancy in the grantee narrative box, what happened, and if there's any changes that you've made to take care of it. At this point, let me just say, it's good to remember that you know your programs better than anyone. It's really good to provide explanations proactively, never assuming that your program officer will have the same understanding you do. So if the information, not off, you know that the data is accurate, but if you know why it happened, put it in here in the explanation. That's again under grantee narrative on this screen. Any questions on this section, MSYs and members?
Yes, I do have a question.
Great.
This person wants to know, could you clarify how to treat an MSY who attrits halfway through the program year? Would that member be considered a negative one? Pardon.
So you're capturing how resources were allocated for the program when you're capturing MSYs. So if you had, for instance, a full-time member who left the program halfway through the year, then you would count that half of MSY's worth of service as 0.5 MSYs.
So in terms of member activity, they would get the 0.5.
Yes, you would also, so for member activity captures the number of members who are providing service related to that objective. So you would actually, you would count that as one member providing service related to that objective, regardless of how much service they provided.
Oh, perfect.
Yeah, I mean, you can't have 1.5 people doing something. So, yeah.
Thanks, Charlotte. Thanks, Charlotte. I'm just getting involved in this discussion because this has come up every time, and for the tutorial, it's really clear that we need to make this part of the example. So I appreciate that question and the answer. Great. Other questions on MSYs?
No, that's it for now. Thank you.
Okay, let's continue then to performance indicators. This is another section that you didn't have to complete for the mid-year or semi-annual report. For the state competitive prime, this again is a screen where you update the information for each subgrantee. You'll need to provide individual explanations about enrollment and retention for these competitive subgrantees. For the formula cost reimbursement portfolio, You do not need to provide explanations for individual subs. You do need to explain in the grantee narrative about the efforts to improve enrollment and retention rates in the portfolio. So let's talk a little bit about what the screen is and what you're responding to. The performance indicators section shows enrollment, retention, 30-day enrollment, and 30-day exit rates. This data is transferred from the AmeriCorps portal the first time the section is opened. The data does not when the tab is reopened, so what you see here is an accurate snapshot of the point in time when you first opened the screen. You'll use the horizontal screen at the bottom of the page to see the chart and work through the data in its entirety. For enrollment and retention, a yes or no appears in the meets CNCS expectations column. Any rate below 100% is assessed as not meeting CNCS's expectations. Explanations and corrective action plans are required for any enrollment and retention rates that are less than 100%. CNCS does understand that it's very difficult to reach 100% with certain intervention models and does recognize the importance of continuing to work in those important areas. However, explanations are required and will assist everyone in reviewing this information. So again, the GPR instructions state that for formula subgrantees, an explanation is not required for each individual sub. But you have to explain in the grantee narrative about efforts to improve enrollment and retention rates in the portfolio. You need to provide individual explanations about enrollment and retention for the competitive subgrantees. I'm sorry, go back one more.
Sorry, I may have jumped ahead.
I moved ahead too fast. Yeah. For the national program, we see that the enrollment rate was 77% and did not meet CNCS expectations. Remember that you have to enter all required explanations, otherwise you won't be able to submit the progress reports. So the project director for this program is going to click on the enter explanation box and will say something like, in this past year, we struggled with member enrollment and ended the year with an enrollment rate of 77%. Enrollment was a challenge for a few reasons, but we found that it was difficult to find members who could commit to full-time positions. We filled all of our part-time positions. For next year, we're requesting more part-time positions and expect to bring our enrollment rate up. Okay, let's now go on to the next screen. As you scroll across the bar at the bottom of the screen, you come to the retention and 30-day enrollment and exit data. In our scenario, the State Commission, their enrollment rate was excellent and met CNCS's expectations. However, for retention, one program had a retention rate of 83% in the last program cycle. Commission enters an explanation under the enter explanation column and open up the box there and would say something like, in reviewing which members exit the program, we noticed that half-time members account for only 20% of our total members, but 85% of our total. The primary programmatic difference between half-time and full-time members occurs during onboarding. Full-time members receive an intensive programmatic orientation that involves, among other things, goal-setting meetings with their site supervisors. The training for half-time members is less robust and does not include goal-setting sessions with site supervisors. Starting last year, we made modifications to the orientation and training provided to half-time members. While it's still too early in the program year to determine how effective these changes will be in retaining members, feedback from members and site supervisors has been very positive. Formula cost reimbursement portfolio, you don't need to provide an explanation for each subgrantee. However, if some of the formula subgrantees did not reach 100% enrollment and retention, you need to explain your efforts to improve enrollment and retention rates in your portfolio. You will speak to that in the grantee narrative box, text box that you open up at the bottom of your screen. Let's talk a minute now about the 30-day enrollment exit compliance. And Liz, if you can show us that screen again, it's way over when you scroll over to the side. Right, 30-day enrollment and 30-day exit. For national grantees or state subgrantees, either competitive or formula, with 30-day enrollment exit compliance rates below 100% for reasons entirely beyond the grantee or subgrantee's control. For example, if the e-grant system is down, provide an explanation in the grantee narrative section. We have seen that on other screens. It's back at the front of this scroll. Based on this explanation, your CNCS program officer may change the compliance status to yes. Other than this, no explanations need to be entered in the GPR 30-day enrollment exit compliance rates. That sort of gives you an overview of the Performance Indicators tab. Are there any questions about this part?
I do have a couple of questions that came in via chat. One was actually referring to the previous MSY's members tab. The person wanted to clarify something.
Perfect.
So so the question goes, so if I understand what you just said about the MSY, then we will count a portion or percent of the MSY based on how much of the member's term of service was completed?
That's correct.
Okay. Thank you, Carla. And second question, we have had programs find that their 30-day enrollment exit rate reports show enrollments exits as happening beyond 30 days if a change or correction is made to the enrollment or exit at a later date. When the compliance with enrollment exit dates is pulled over into this report, will the same problem transfer over?
Yes, so that is, sorry, were you not done?
No, I'm done.
Okay, so yeah, so that is a known issue. We know that eGrants does that. The information is pulling from the portal from eGrants into this part of eGrants. And so that information will pull in the way that it is expressed in the system. That is why the instructions, and you heard Justine say, that is why if there are circumstances beyond a subgrantee's control, then you make a note of that in the grantee narrative. And so that's why we have that as part of the process for this. So you will be listing any of those subs for whom those kinds of issues are the reason that it looks like they're not compliant, even though they are. You put that in the grantee narrative, and then the program officer has their own little checkbox where they can mark that subgrantee or grantee as compliant despite what the percentage actually says.
And this person wants to know, do we need to make notes here if we refill slots?
No. I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure I understand the reason behind the question. So the point of entering
This would be MSYs, right? Or
are we talking about MSYs, or are we talking about like the enrollment rate?
Enrollment.
Okay. So we're just looking at the enrollment rate, and if the enrollment rate is below 100%, then there needs to be an explanation if you're a competitive grantee. So so you don't need, I mean, you would tell us why your enrollment rate was what it was, but just because you refilled a slot, you don't have to tell us that.
A question just came in. Did I understand correctly that we only need to provide explanation narrative if it relates to circumstances out of our control, in parentheses, 30-day compliance?
That is correct for 30-day compliance. The rationale being that that's, I mean, either you're compliant or you're not, and so we didn't require an explanation for that.
Thanks, Carla. That's all the questions I have.
Great. Let's move on then to performance measures.
Okay.
Liz.
Thanks, Justine. Okay, so on the Performance Measures tab, notice a list of our competitive subgrantees here. It's also in collapsed view, and we've chosen the education program Promising Start to go over. And notice that when the subgrantee name is expanded, you'll see the objectives. And then when we expand each objective, you'll see the output and outcome. In this section, we'll report on output and outcome data only. MSY and member targets that were entered in the application also appear here. However, programs do not report actual MSYs or members at the performance measure. Enter 0 in all the member fields. And use the horizontal scroll bar at the bottom of the page to see the chart in its entirety. For each output and outcome, we'll enter a numerical value documenting progress toward the target. And remember to round any decimals to the nearest whole. In our sample subgrantee program, the members and volunteers in Promising Start actually had 550 students participate in the one-on-one tutoring in literacy skills. Of those students, 500 completed participation in the program. They anticipated 400 students would demonstrate gains in school readiness in terms of literacy skills. And of that number, 410 actually showed a gain in literacy skills. Similar to the previous tab, once we have entered the numbers, we'll click Done with Section, and then repeat this step for all of the subgrantees. Finally, click the Calculate button at the lower right, and eGrants will calculate the numerical difference and the percent difference between the performance measure target and actual. In each performance measure panel, these values will appear in the difference and percent difference columns. A yes or no will appear in the met target column. An explanation is required for any output or outcome target that was not met. To enter an explanation, click the Enter Explanation button in the Explanation/Corrective Action column, and fill in an explanation and corrective action plan in the text box. If this explanation applies to other unmet targets for the measure, for example, if an output or outcome were unmet for the same reason, clicking the Copy button located under the text box will automatically copy the explanation to the other outputs and outcomes in that measure. A note about the mid-year reporting. You do report performance measure data mid-year. The system does generate met, not met, and you will need to provide an explanation. However, CNCS does not expect that you will have met your targets at mid-year. For guidance, please refer to the mid-year GPR instructions. For those of you completing a GPR on the old screens, you will enter your explanation in the Successes and Challenges section of the narrative. And Justine will now talk about guidance for the formula grant and applicant-determined measures.
Yeah, yes, thanks, Liz. So for applicant-determined measures, with the competitive portfolio, you will select a value of either yes or no in the met target column. You will select no if the subgrantee's actual is less than the target, even if they have ongoing activities. For the formula cost reimbursement portfolio, actuals are not required for applicant-determined performance fields will actually be grayed out. The instructions state that in lieu of providing actuals for the applicant-determined measures, you select a value of either yes or no in the met target column. You also don't have to provide explanations for this portfolio. let me go back. For all subgrantees with ongoing activities. All right, so now we're thinking about subgrantees that have ongoing activities. You will need to provide an explanation for this, even if the performance measure targets were met. The explanation is provided in the explanation corrective action box. That's for the competitives, and for the formulas, you'll need to provide a list of all subgrantees whose activities are still ongoing in the grantee narrative text box, which, as you know, is back at the front of this screen. National programs will enter actuals only for those measures that contain a national performance measure output and outcome. Before we finish the performance measures part and then take questions on this, it's just a good time to think about proactively meeting the expectations of your program officer. So we want to say just a few words about the program officer's role as they review this information and what it is that they're really looking for as they review it. Some of the questions that come to mind for them is in the end of the year GPR, did the grantee enter performance measures actuals that are equal to or greater than what was submitted in the mid-year GPR? Do the numbers reported make sense? Do outputs make sense in relation to MSYs? For example, did the grantee report 100 MSYs in education, but also report an output showing that only 50 students were served? Do outcomes exceed outputs? For example, did the grantee report that 50 students were served, but also reported that 100 students improved attendance? Wouldn't every teacher love that? Are actuals much higher or lower than targets? If so, has an appropriate explanation been provided? Exceeding targets needs to be explained as the reason could be that the grantee is not measuring accurately or not setting appropriate targets. Finally, if the grantee has more than one grant, have they avoided double counting? CNCS encourages you to provide explanations for any issue like this or anything else that pops up for you so that these do not have to be clarified later. Again, remember that you know your programs best of all. And if there's something that you think would help somebody understand the data, it's important to provide that information at this point rather than waiting to see if it needs to be clarified. We have questions on performance measures.
Yes, a few questions came in via chat. A few of them pertaining to if this webinar will be available online or the PowerPoint, and the answer is yes. This session is being recorded and posted, as well as the PowerPoint. It should be available in about a couple of weeks. The tutorial will also be available in about a month, but we'll go over this information at the end of the session when we talk about resources. Sorry, I'm scrolling through to make sure that I haven't missed anybody's question. Okay.
If we haven't covered anybody's question, just push *6 and let us know.
Person wants to know what kind of explanatory information are you looking for where a measure has been met?
So sometimes when people greatly exceed their performance measures, that is a signal to us that they are not measuring correctly, or they are measuring something different than what they said in their application that they said they would measure. It is also sometimes a signal that they are not setting appropriate targets. So we ask, generally program officers will ask about that if a grantee has significantly exceeded their performance measure targets on some performance measures. So what we would be looking for by way of explanation would be, what is the reason that the grantee greatly exceeded this target? In most cases, no explanation is required if the grantee met the target, but in a case like that, we're going to have some questions. We're going to be looking at those numbers and thinking, why is their target so off from what they actually did? and we'll want to get to the bottom of that. So to be proactive and provide that explanation will help us.
Question. For clarity, are we to submit performance measures for each subgrantee and those totals will roll up?
Yes.
So as commissions have always done, they're providing performance measurement actuals by subgrantee. Some differences between what's provided for formula and competitive, but basically the answer to that question is yes. Nothing has changed in terms of what you're providing related to performance measurement data.
Next question. Also, can you please have them review the part of the section that is related to indicating the names of specific subs that have ongoing performance measures? Where do I enter their name?
We talked about that, not ongoing performance measures, but ongoing activities. Let's see now. Here's what we have. For the formula program, you provide a list of all subgrantees whose activities are still ongoing in the grantee narrative text box. So Liz, if you would put your arrow down there on this screen. That's for the formula grantees. Now for the formula grantees, Liz, I think they put it in the grantee narrative text box. Right.
Sorry.
Now for the competitive grantees, for those with ongoing activities, you'll need to provide an explanation for this, even if the performance targets were met. And for the competitive then, that explanation is provided in the explanation corrective action text box, which is the one that Liz had pointed out before up at the top. So competitive, you enter it here, and formulas, you enter it down in the grantee narrative text box. Don't worry, this is covered in the guidance.
Okay. The last question did ask, so for competitive NPM, an explanation is required if 1, targets are not met, or 2, targets are met, but activities remain ongoing. I think you just answered that question too.
Right.
That's all the questions I have for now.
Okay, let's move on. This is the narrative section. And this section is for the end of year only as well. This narrative information from a commission's point of view is for the entire commission portfolio and will be entered in the formula cost reimbursement GPR. Again, for this 1 year, if you are entering any information in these new screens on the GPR, this is where you will cover your entire portfolio. If you're only entering GPR information in last year's screens, it's there that you will take care of your narrative. The narrative information here's where you will talk about your total portfolio, not about individual programs. You click on the links to expand the panels to enter the narratives. The analysis of impact section is required. Here is where you describe how AmeriCorps member service is making an impact in the community that it would not have been possible through existing staff or volunteers. If applicable, you as a commission can describe how AmeriCorps has enabled you to leverage new public-private partnerships, funding, and other resources. If it applies to your program or your grant, your program, you will describe the collective impact of subgrantees on the CNCS focus areas and other priorities in your state. Additionally, you will describe any factors or trends that positively or negatively affect your portfolio performance. That's what you cover in analysis of impact. And again, this is a high-level view, a high-level synthesis, hitting on those points if they're applicable and appropriate. The impact snapshots is optional and offers an opportunity for you to provide one or more examples of a change in beneficiary knowledge, attitude, behavior, or condition that a subgrantee has been able to measure. If you fill this one out, include the program name, geographic locations, and 2 to 3 sentences describing the problem, intervention, and quantifiable change in beneficiaries. An example from our scenario could be that the children aged 3 to 5 years in the Promising Start program are inadequately prepared to enter kindergarten due to lack of pre-literacy activities. AmeriCorps members recruited and trained volunteers to be placed in state-sponsored preschool programs to provide literacy training to these children. Volunteers provided tutoring to children 3 times a week, readability as measured by pre- and post tests completed in September and May. Of the 550 children served, 410 showed an increase in literacy. Member experience is also a required section. Here you describe any activities and accomplishments relative to member experience that were not captured in national performance measures. You describe how the entire portfolio has ensured that members consistently find satisfaction, meaning, and opportunity through national service. And finally, on this page, the other section is required and allows commissions, grantees to describe the training and technical assistance they have provided to their subs or sites during this reporting period. Explain how you've implemented your monitoring plan and discuss any significant issues or trends you've identified through programmatic and fiscal monitoring and how you're responding to them. Again, just a note, as a commission, and as a national program too, but let's talk about it as a commission, you should not provide information on every subgrantee when responding to narrative questions, as tempting as it is, because that's where often the heartstrings go. But you should provide a high-level synthesis of information about your portfolio, supplemented by relative examples. And for national programs, you don't talk about your sites here. You do not introduce new information, but simply comment more broadly on the more detailed data presented elsewhere in the GPR. Impact snapshots should reflect significant accomplishments the Commission would like to highlight. Commissions aren't required to submit an impact snapshot from every grantee. National programs also complete this section, making sure to synthesize information from all operating sites and locations. You'll note here, when the accordion panels are closed, green check marks appear to indicate that text has been entered in that text box. That's a nice and quick way to check if you've added something in the text box. And remember that text must be entered in every narrative field before submitting the GPR. If something doesn't apply to your portfolio, enter NA in the text. And as Liz has reminded me each time, be sure to save and save often, and particularly when you get to this area of narratives or when you're giving explanations, it's perhaps useful to put it first in a Word document and then copy and paste so that you have this here and you don't lose your data. We are checking to see what the character limits are. That's not information that we have currently, but we are checking and we'll get that information out to you. Are there questions on the narrative section?
Questions, thank you.
Great. Let's move on to the summary charts.
Okay. Thanks, Justine. The summary section provides a summary of the data that we entered in the previous tabs. We see pie charts and an MSY member summary chart showing resource allocations and member activities. You may notice that the title of the pie charts refer to volunteers, but they actually mean MSYs. CNCS is aware of this and are in the process of changing it. Column graphs below show performance against national performance measure targets. For commissions, this data is aggregated at the prime level. The subgrantee performance summary provides a quick visual reference for subgrantee performance. Notice the scroll bar to the right, and it shows that we're at the top of the screen. It's actually a pretty long screen, so you'll have to scroll down. So let's scroll down and see what we have here. When we scroll down the page, we can see some print options. To view or print a summary of all data entered for a single subgrantee, you'll select a subgrantee from the drop-down box and click Print Subgrantee Report next to the right. This will be useful for when the State Commission Program Officer needs to meet with an individual sub about their program. And Justine's going to talk about clarification items right now.
Great. Thanks, Liz. Through each of the screens, here's some additional information on clarifications to keep in mind. For each tab where data is entered, these tabs that we've been through, the CNCS Program Officer reviews the data and determines whether or not clarification is necessary. If no clarification is required, the Program Officer closes out that tab and ultimately the GPR. If clarification is required, the Program Officer checks the clarification required box on each tab that requires clarification and returns the GPR for additional work. The following text fields for feedback and clarification appear on all tabs where data is entered. Program Officer feedback. This is an area where the Program Officer may provide feedback, and grantees are not required to provide clarification regarding the feedback. Program Officer clarification items contains clarification items from the CNCS Program Officer. Grantees are required to respond to these clarification items. Grantee clarification items, this is the text box at the very bottom there. This is the text box where grantees would open this text box to enter their responses to the clarification items that appear in the Program Officer clarification items field. So now you're ready to submit. Liz.
Now, before we talk about the submit, let's go over the last text box. Now that we're covering text boxes, the overall grantee note text box at the bottom of the screen. You can use this to add any comments that you want to include on this summary before submitting the GPR. So after responding to all clarification items, we can return the report to CNCS by clicking Grantee Submit to CNCS. If the progress report does not require clarification, or if all clarification items have been satisfactorily addressed, the CNCS Program Officer will set the GPR status to Reviewed. The grantee will then receive email notification and will be able to review all feedback provided in the progress report.
Great.
And
so
that
are there
takes us...
No, are there questions that have come up with that summary?
No questions, thank you.
Any questions that we have not been able to cover for people? If there are any and you want to push *6, you would be unmuted. Okay.
Okay. So that takes us to the resources section. The recording will be available online soon. The tutorial, again, will be posted in about a month. Meanwhile, here are some additional resources. The AmeriCorps website will give you additional information about the program type. You can access the eGrants login page by visiting the eGrants website. On it, you'll find the National Service Hotline phone number for technical assistance and a link to an online form to submit your question or technical issue relating to the eGrant system. And finally, the NPM or National Performance Measures link will take you to a website where you can refresh your memory about performance measures. Tutorials and resources on performance measures can also be accessed from the NPM site as well. This concludes our webinar on AmeriCorps State, National, and Tribal Grantee Progress Report. We'd like to thank Carla Gagnon for being on the session to provide guidance. And thank you all for joining us today. Carla, do you have any closing comments?
Just want to say thanks everyone for joining us. We know that this is new and different, and we hope that you will let us know if you have any problems. Let your program officer know if anything seems incorrect to you, and we appreciate your patience as we roll this out for the first time.
Thank you, Carla.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Have a good Thursday evening.